welcome to pattern making class. This is Annette Julie, and in one of the last videos we took a basic one dart front bodice and we added fullness. We've extended the hem by 3 inches and we swung the side seam out, and we can make a nice blouson top at this point with this. But there's a few more things that we could do. We could go ahead and add our seam allowance. 1/2 inch on the shoulder, and in our neckline 1/4 inch. So you're going to make short little lines and rotate around that circle. Then we'll come back with the curve ruler and connect them to make a nice continuous line. Here in the armhole, we're adding 1/2 inch. I always like to square my seam allowance there. So you can make little short lines as well, because this is a curve and we're going to need to use our curve ruler. So we'll have little short lines. And now we have got to the side seam, and this is going to be 1/2 inch seam allowance. We'll square that seam allowance right there. I'm going to go ahead and take my curve to connect. Let's go ahead and flip that ruler. Now we're going to do the neckline. Connect those little lines, flip that ruler, connect, and this part is squared right there at the center front for 1/4 of an inch. And so we've added 1/4 inch into the neckline, 1/2 inch in the shoulder. That's the seam allowance. In our shoulder here, this is 1/2 inch seam allowance. Armhole, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Let's bring that notch out so we can see it. Here, this is 1/2 inch seam allowance in our side seam. Now when you come down to the hem, you could do 1/2 inch. You could also do 1 inch. It depends on what you're doing. If you have a self-casing with elastic, this could be 1.5 inches. So I think I'll just choose 1 inch for now. We don't know exactly what we're doing with our design, but I'll give it a little bit of a substantial hem. I can always shorten it. So I'm curving around. I'm adding the short lines. 1 inch away from the hem that I drew. And go ahead and connect with our curve ruler. Give ourselves a nice continuous blended hem. We have a nice 1 inch hem now. Let's go ahead and draw our notch here at the side seam. But we're not going to keep that line there. Our hem is going to angle in. So we'll fix that in a minute. Seam allowance looks good. And as far as the first pattern goes, it's perfectly fine to keep this on there to see what you have done. So you know if you need to change it to give it more fullness, how much more you might want to spread it, how you got there. It's a good reference point. Let's go ahead and cut this pattern out. We've got 2 layers, so we're going to have a full front pattern piece. We pattern make quite often with just half because a lot of things are symmetrical. Then we will cut it butterflied or cut 2. If there's an opening down the front or the back, we will cut 2. Cutting out our shoulder. Then we're going to do our armhole and our side seam. Now we're into the armhole. It's nice to have a weight on there. It can help to hold everything in place when especially when you're cutting 2 layers like we are now. Now we're going to cut our side seam. I think we'll trim the hem a little bit. Trim up our side seam. And our hem. Like I said, this can be a blouson top. It can also end up being longer in a trapeze dress or a blouson dress. And blouson means added fullness through that torso. So now we're going to go ahead and fold up this hem over here. This hem's going to fold back on itself. You might have to put a little basting stitch in there, but it doesn't need all the fullness there at the side seam. Let's see if we can take a little bit off. Maybe a little bit. I'm just going to angle this in ever so slightly. Take off a little bit. We put a little U around our notch. And now we're going to add notches here for the seam allowance. Up here at the side seam. In at the armhole. And in at the shoulder. And you don't need to notch that 1/4 of an inch. And this is gone. A little line through that. And this is also, this is not a dart. There's nothing there. So this is added fullness right through there. Plus 2 inches. And like I said, perfectly fine to keep that as a reference point. And so this is your front blouson with increased added fullness. I'm Annette Julie, and I look forward to you checking out my next video where we do the back.